My name is Diane, 63 years old, widowed for more than 10 years. I always thought after all those storms in life, nothing could break my heart anymore. But then, one December morning, when I opened the mailbox on my porch, I found a thick envelope with the bank's logo. My hands trembled as I tore it open, and I nearly dropped it when I read the first line, Notice of Debt, Guarantor Diane Walker. What choked me wasn't the massive debt of $80,000, but the signature at the bottom of the paper, the forged signature of my own name. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Melissa's, my daughter's, along with her husband Ethan's. In that moment, every sound around me went silent. I could hear my heart pounding, heat rising in my chest. I had spent my entire life raising my child, pouring every bit of savings into my family. And now my own daughter had turned me into a debtor. If it were you, what would you do when the very child you once cradled in your arms, the one you sacrificed everything for, coldly signed your name to steal money? I sat frozen on the kitchen chair, the notice of debt trembling in my hand. The bold letters felt like they were driving straight into my chest. $80,000, a forged signature, and the name Melissa, my daughter, the one I had believed was my reason for living. My throat tightened. My vision blurred. Whether from tears or from the swell of righteous anger, I couldn't tell. I closed my eyes, leaned back into the chair, and let the memories roll in. For more than 35 years, I stood on the podium, teaching children to read and to be decent people. The job never made me rich, but I loved it as if it were part of me. I remember winter mornings when it was still dark, carrying my heavy briefcase into the classroom. The children's greeting smiles were the motivation that kept me going. I used to think my life didn't need much, just a peaceful family and children who grew up right. And that would be enough. But fate never stays still. When Melissa was only 16 and Brian 13, my husband Thomas was taken in a traffic accident. The night I received the news, I felt torn in two. In the stark white emergency room, I held my husband's cold hand, panicked and unsure what tomorrow would bring. The two children stood trembling in the hospital hallway. I looked into their eyes and knew that from then on, all the burdens would fall on my shoulders. I had no right to collapse. I handled the funeral and returned to school to teach just 2 weeks later. By day, I stood in front of the class. By night, I painstakingly prepared lessons, then took on extra tutoring jobs, even stocking shelves at the supermarket on weekends to earn a little extra. I remember the time I was standing at the checkout and an acquaintance saw me. They looked at me with pity, but I just smiled and said, "Every little bit helps, as long as my children can go to school." Melissa was my great pride then. She studied well, always at the top of her class, smart and sharp. The teachers often told me, "This girl will surely have a bright future." I listened, both warmed and worried, afraid I might not be able to support her dreams. Brian was different, gentle, quiet, fond of drawing and playing our old guitar. He didn't chase achievements, he only wanted a peaceful family. In the years that followed, I hardly had a single real day off. I carefully recorded every bill, calculated every dollar for electricity and water. Sometimes I had to choose between buying a new pair of shoes for myself or paying summer tuition for the children. Every time, I chose the children. I remember one moment I'll never forget. It was snowing heavily. My old car broke down in the street. I had to haul my teaching materials and walk more than 3 miles through the snow to get home in time to prepare dinner for the two of them. When I walked through the door, I found Melissa hunched over writing an essay and Brian stoking the stove. They both looked up and beamed at me. "Mom, you're home." Their laughter wiped away all my exhaustion and left only the conviction that my sacrifices were worth it. I never complained. Throughout the years, Melissa was at college in Boston. I worked myself to exhaustion to send money for her dorm and books. I wanted her to have the opportunities I never had. I wanted her to live a better life than mine. I always believed that one day, looking back, my daughter would understand that her mother had given up her youth and health for her. Brian later moved to Minnesota to work as a software engineer. He lived simply and rarely came home. But every time he called, he asked, "Are you eating enough? Is it too cold?" He wasn't as good at making money as his sister, but his heart was always with me. As for Melissa, she changed. After graduation, she stepped into the glamorous world she had dreamed of. She liked expensive dresses, fancy restaurants, and told me I needed to learn to live bigger. I usually laughed it off, thinking it was just youthful vanity. But when she married Ethan, a handsome, smooth-talking man, I began to worry. I still remember at the wedding, when Melissa took my hand and whispered, "Mom, from now on, I won't let you suffer anymore." That promise felt like honey soothing my heart. I believed that, after all the storms, my daughter would finally appreciate and repay me. I never imagined that that marriage would be the beginning of the deepest cracks in our family. In the years after, whenever Melissa called, there was usually an air of luxury in her voice, a trip to Miami, a new sofa, or a party in a house bigger than my dreams. I listened, both glad that she had abundance and quietly worried she might be overextended. I once intended to ask directly, "Are you okay? Do you have any debts?" But I held back, afraid she would think I was intruding. Now, with the notice of debt staring me in the face, those memories return like a knife. I realize I have lived my whole life believing that love and sacrifice would be acknowledged. I threw myself into work, poured all my money and energy into giving my children a future. I believed that family after everything would be the one place that never betrayed me. But now, looking at the forged signature of my name, I understand that belief is shattering into pieces. And perhaps, all the sacrifices I once thought were worth it were just illusions. I told myself so I could keep walking down this rough road. I sighed, my head spinning, and I was taken back to the day Melissa told me she was getting married. That day she called me from Boston, her voice full of joy. "Mom, I've met someone wonderful. His name is Ethan. His family has their own business, they're quite well off. I think this time I've truly found my place." I smiled over the phone, hiding the little worry inside me. Since she was a child, Melissa had always dreamed of a life bigger than what I could give. She liked shiny things and being where people looked up at her. I only hoped Ethan wasn't just a flashy shell. I still remember every detail of her wedding room, the lights sparkling, long tables draped in pristine white cloth, crystal glasses glinting. Ethan appeared in an expensive suit, his smile confident. He shook my hand firmly, but his eyes were a bit cold, as if sizing me up more than greeting me. Melissa glowed in her magnificent wedding dress. She hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Mom, from now on I won't let you suffer anymore." Those words stung my eyes. I believed them. After the wedding, Melissa and Ethan bought a house in a Boston suburb, an area full of pitched-roof mansions with neatly trimmed gardens. The first time I came, I was nearly overwhelmed. The house was 3 times larger than the little home I lived in. The living room had an Italian leather sofa set. The kitchen was fitted with gleaming appliances. Melissa proudly showed me every corner. "See, Mom, this is the life I've always dreamed of. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. From now on, I'll take care of you." I nodded, but my heart was uneasy. I knew Ethan's work, small-scale real estate, was unstable. Markets go up and down. Yet both of them spent as if money would never run out. Each time I visited, there was something new, a shiny SUV in the garage, new furniture, or talk of a vacation in Miami, then Las Vegas. I listened, both happy and concerned. Once, I suggested, "Melissa, you should save something for a rainy day. No one knows what life will bring." She laughed and shook her head. Mom, you always worry too much. Nowadays you have to enjoy life. Mom, money is for living, not for hiding in the bank. I fell silent, looking at that confident smile, and inwardly prayed they wouldn't face a storm. Brian, on the other hand, was a completely different picture. After graduating, he moved to Minnesota to work as a software engineer. He lived simply, rented a small apartment, and drove an old car. Whenever he called, he would ask, "Are you eating well? Mom, in winter, make sure you turn the heat up, don't skimp." I would just smile, "I'm fine. Hearing your voice warms me." Brian stayed out of the family's business, partly because of the distance, and partly because he never fit his sister's flashy lifestyle. Whenever he visited and heard Melissa boast about new things or discuss investments with Ethan, Brian would sit quietly in a corner, his eyes showing worry. Later, when it was just the two of us, he'd often say softly, "Mom, I think Melissa is spending a bit too much. I'm afraid one day I would wave him off." "Oh, don't worry. Your sister knows how to take care of her family." But deep inside, Brian's words were like a pebble dropped into a pond, sending out ripples. Time passed, and I continued to attend Melissa's fancy house on holidays, still hearing about trips and big plans. Once I tried to ask, "Do you save anything for the future?" Melissa sighed and waved her hand. "Mom, you don't understand. Everything cycles. When you live big, big opportunities come. Ethan and I are investing, you'll see." Ethan would just smirk and add, "Don't worry, Mom. We know what we're doing." I forced a smile and dared not ask more. But the dazzling light in that house never quite chased away the chill inside me. Because somewhere, amid the wine glasses and new dresses, I heard a faint whisper of worry, the echo of the years I'd struggled to raise my children. The fear that one day it would all collapse like a house built on sand. Then the first odd signs began to appear. One afternoon I picked up the mail from the porch as usual. Among the ads and bills was an envelope from the bank addressed to me. Strangely, the edge had been slit and poorly resealed, leaving a small crease. I shivered for a moment but told myself it was probably the postal worker's mistake. Inside was only a balance, notice nothing out of the ordinary. I put it aside. But a nagging unease stayed with me. A few days later, the landline rang. A polite, unfamiliar male voice said, "Hello, Mrs. Walker. We need to verify information about a recent loan in your name." I froze. "What loan? I haven't borrowed anything." There was a pause on the other end. Then a hurried apology about a possible system error. I hung up with my hands still shaking. That evening Melissa came by and I told her while pouring tea, forcing a smile, "Do you think it's strange? Someone called saying, I took out a loan. Must be a mistake." "Right," Melissa shrugged and took a sip. "Oh, it's surely a mix-up. But Mom, you don't need that much retirement money anyway. Let me take care of you. Lighter on your shoulders is better." I stopped mid-motion. Her words felt like a pin pressing on an old wound. I laughed it off. But inside I felt unsettled. Another time I visited Melissa and happened to see a stack of bank papers on the table. Before I could ask, Ethan stepped out and quickly gathered them up, forcing a smile. "Just some paperwork. Don't worry about it, Mom." The way his eyes darted away made my heart go cold. After that, Melissa often hinted on the phone, "Mom, you should let me manage your retirement savings. Leaving it unused is a waste. I can invest it for returns." I answered gently, "I don't need much. It's safest to keep it in the bank." She laughed. "You're always old-fashioned. You'll understand someday." That night, I tossed and turned, remembering my promise to Thomas that the retirement fund would be our last refuge. I had believed Melissa was ambitious but wouldn't harm me. So why did every word she spoke now feel like it was twisting the knife? When I told Brian about it on one call, he quietly advised, "Mom, I don't want to think the worst about Melissa. But be careful. Don't sign anything until you're sure. Don't let her touch your retirement account." I brushed it off. I must be worrying too much. Your sister wouldn't do that. Brian sighed into the phone. I just don't want your kindness to be taken advantage of. His words echoed in my head for days. Still, I clung to the belief that my daughter would never betray me. I thought, as I had so many times before, that my worries would pass. I did not know that that stubborn trust of mine was leading me closer to the fateful moment the day I received the notice of debt with my own name forged on it. 1 week later, Melissa called and invited me to their house for dinner. "Come over. Mom, it's been a while since the whole family sat down together properly," she said confidently. I agreed, though my heart was in turmoil. The paper from the bank still lay in the bedroom drawer, every time I opened it. That signature felt like a knife twisting in me. That evening, Melissa's house was ablaze with lights. The long dining table was draped in a white cloth and set with elaborate dishes: steak, salad, red wine sparkling in crystal glasses. I sat down and forced a smile. Ethan spoke first. In a measured tone, "Mom, it's so good that you came. You look healthier these days." I only nodded, not wanting to stretch the small talk. The meal proceeded slowly. Melissa talked at length about investment projects, trips, and a new dress she'd bought at an upscale store in the city. I listened, lifting my fork now and then, feeling both strange and suffocated. Then she slipped, her voice casual, as if letting out a breath. "If you don't pay, our house will be gone. You wouldn't want to see us go bankrupt, would you?" The fork in my hand clattered onto my plate with a harsh metallic sound. The room fell suddenly silent. Melissa realized she had misspoken and quickly bit her lip. But it was already too late. I looked straight at her, my voice trembling. "What did you just say? If I don't pay, what do you mean?" Melissa fumbled, eyes darting around, before she looked to Ethan, as if for support. He set his wineglass down, leaned back in his chair, and spoke in a voice cold as steel. "You already know. The loan, $80,000. We used your name. Honestly, you should be grateful we're even giving you the chance to help us keep up appearances." I sat stunned. His words fell like hammers. Melissa interjected, pleading yet calculating. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Ethan and I put all our capital into this house and into the business. If we go under, everything's gone. I don't want to lose it all," I whispered, almost unable to believe it. "You forged my signature to take out a loan, Melissa. Do you understand what you've done?" She bowed her head, her voice shaking. "I just thought, you have retirement savings. You don't need that much. I promised I'd only borrow it temporarily, and I'd pay it back." I laughed, bitter and strangled, so alien even to myself. "Borrow temporarily? You made me into a debtor. And you call that borrowing temporarily?" Ethan leaned toward me, his gaze disdainful. "Face reality. Mom, everyone out there thinks you're a gentle retired teacher living quietly. But how long could you keep that up if people knew? You refuse to help your own child. We just need you to sign a few more papers. It'll be fine." When I looked into his eyes, I saw only cold calculation. I trembled to my feet, my hands gripping the table edge to steady myself. In my head, the broken pieces of memory came crashing together: the opened envelope, the loan verification call, Melissa's hint about the retirement funds. They all linked into a painful, suffocating picture. I turned to Melissa, my voice choked. "I sacrificed my whole life for you. And this is how you choose to repay me." She wouldn't meet my eyes, whispering, "Please don't say that." I had no choice. In that moment, I understood clearly this was not an accident. It was blatant betrayal, a line that cut me off from the daughter I had given birth to. And that dinner, which should have been ordinary, became the irreversible turning point for our family. The next morning, I decided to go to the bank. The sky was gray, a light rain falling, but my heart felt heavier than the gloomy clouds above. I stepped into the branch where I had kept my retirement savings for so many years. The room was lit by harsh fluorescent lights, filled with the smell of paper and disinfectant. And I felt dizzy the moment I stood at the counter. A young teller with blonde hair tied neatly back greeted me with a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" "Mrs. Walker," I tried to keep my voice steady. "I need to check on a loan, in my name." She looked briefly surprised, then began typing rapidly. The sound of the keyboard echoed in the silence until it stopped. Her expression changed as she stared at the screen. "Uneasy. Mrs. Walker, I can confirm there is a loan for $80,000. Signed and guaranteed by you." I trembled, forcing myself to speak. "I have never signed any such document. Show me the original." She hesitated, then printed a copy and placed it in front of me. My eyes locked on the bottom line. It was my name, Diane Walker, but the letters were warped, lacking weight. A clumsy forgery, yet close enough to pass. Blood pounded in my temples, my hands icy cold. "This is not my signature," I said, my voice breaking. The teller swallowed hard, looking at me with sympathy. "In this case, you can file a formal complaint. But there's something else you should know." I looked up, my heart pounding. "What is it?" She glanced around and lowered her voice. "In addition to the $80,000 loan, the records show a mortgage in your name, using the old house on Maple Street as collateral." The world blurred before me. I gripped the counter, my legs suddenly weak. "The house, the one on Maple Street, where my husband and I lived for 30 years. You're saying it's been mortgaged?" She nodded, her eyes filled with pity. "The file shows the contract was signed almost a year ago. The signature is yours." I couldn't take in another word. My ears rang. The room spun. In that instant, Robert's image flashed before me standing on the porch, chalk dust still clinging to his hands after fixing the fence. His laughter echoed in my memory, blending with the frantic beating of my heart. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor. A security guard and the blonde teller were helping me up. Voices called urgently, and the smell of disinfectant grew stronger. "Mrs. Walker, can you hear me? Do you need an ambulance?" I drew a shaky breath and forced myself to sit up. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't tell if from physical pain or from a heart breaking apart. I whispered, my voice hoarse, "It was my daughter. She did this." The bank fell silent for a few seconds, the only sound the rain against the glass. In the eyes of those around me, I saw the crushing truth. I, a mother, had been driven to the brink of ruin by my own flesh and blood. Sitting on the waiting bench, I stared at my calloused hands, hands worn from more than 30 years of chalk and papers now trembling. Unable to hold on to anything, I remembered the sleepless nights spent preparing lessons, the afternoons bent over side jobs, the pennies saved so my children could have a better life. And now, all those sacrifices lay shattered in bitter ruins before my eyes. In the days that followed, I felt lost. Each morning, when the sun slipped through the curtains, I would sit motionless at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold, unable to take a sip. I needed someone to take my hand and remind me that there was still a way out. The first name that came to mind was Harold. Harold was not only an old friend of my husband's, he was also a seasoned lawyer. Years ago, he was the one who had helped Thomas when we bought the house on Maple Street, handling the paperwork and making sure everything was legal. After my husband died, Harold would stop by occasionally, send a Christmas card, Ask a few polite questions. I knew I could trust him. I called, my voice shaking. Harold, this is Diane. I need to see you. It's serious about Melissa and Ethan. That afternoon I went to his office. Harold was much older now. His hair white. His eyes still bright, but with a sternness about them. He greeted me with a firm handshake and invited me to sit. I handed him the stack of bank papers. He read in silence, frowning from time to time. When he folded the documents, he looked at me for a long while. Diane, what I'm about to tell you may be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth. I swallowed and nodded. Harold began. I have a few contacts in the financial world. I'll ask them to look into this further. But right now, I can say with certainty, this $80,000 is only the surface. I've heard whispers that Ethan has ties to gambling. And lately, he's been into cryptocurrency investments. Melissa, she's probably been pulled in too. I widened my eyes. Gambling, cryptocurrency, oh my Melissa, she's not that kind of person. Harold sighed and spoke slowly. People can change, Diane, especially when they live in luxury and always want more. You need to be prepared. I sat in silence, my heart heavy like a stone. A pain rose in me that I couldn't describe, a mix of fury and sorrow. I didn't know whom to blame more, Ethan, who dragged my daughter into the mire, or Melissa herself, the child who once vowed she would never let me suffer. 2 days later, Harold called back. His voice was grave as he confirmed my worst fear. Diane, I have concrete figures now. The 80,000 was just the tip of the iceberg. In reality, Melissa and her husband are buried in more than $300,000 of debt. Some of it comes from losses in crypto trading. Some from high-interest loans taken to cover Ethan's gambling debts. They hid it from you. But the trail can't be erased. I clenched the phone, my whole body trembling. $300,000. The number rang like a funeral bell. I whispered, how can they survive with such a massive debt? And why drag me down with them? Harold replied, his voice firm but sympathetic. Because you are their last refuge. They believe you'll never turn your back, no matter what they do. But Diane, you must be clear-headed. This is no longer about helping your child, this is about protecting yourself. I sank into my chair, my hands pressed to my forehead. Tears streamed down onto the cold wooden table. I remembered Melissa as a little girl, running up to hug me each morning, hair a mess, chirping, Mom, today you'll teach me to write the letter A. Right, I remembered secretly slipping extra money into her wallet for books when she went to college. I remembered her wedding day, when she whispered, Mom, I'll never let you suffer. And now those words felt like a knife in my chest. How much had I given? How much had I sacrificed to raise her, only to be repaid with $300,000 of debt and a forged signature? Harold handed me a tissue, his voice low. Diane, you must decide quickly. If you don't, they'll keep exploiting you. And one day, you'll lose everything. I nodded. But inside, I was tangled. I wanted to rage. Yet I also wanted to hold my daughter and shake some sense into her. But I understood this was beyond my control. Melissa was no longer the 16-year-old who sobbed when her father died. She was an adult who had chosen the wrong path and taken her mother with her. On the way home, the streets were crowded and I hardly recognized them. Streetlights blurred through my tears. I wondered if, with my blind love and absolute trust, I had unwittingly helped create this tragedy. $300,000. The figure echoed in my head like a sentence hanging over my life. I went home and sat for hours at the old wooden table in the kitchen. Every tick of the clock on the wall pounded in my temples, reminding me of what Harold had just told me. And then, like a film rewinding, memories of the times I had quietly paid for Melissa came flooding back. piece by piece, forming a painful picture. There was the time, right after she graduated, when Melissa complained she couldn't afford her rent. I had pulled a few $100s from my savings, hiding it from Brian. I told myself, just this once, she's young. She'll find her footing. Then, when she was planning her wedding, Melissa cried that she didn't have enough to pay for the reception. I quietly withdrew money from my account, comforting myself. A daughter's wedding day, she shouldn't have to lack anything. And the times afterward, when she claimed her car had broken down and needed urgent repairs, or when Ethan lost a contract, I opened my wallet. Each time I handed her money, I told myself I do this because I love her. But now I realize those unconditional helps had turned me into a walking wallet, always ready to open whenever she wanted. One evening, Brian called me. His voice carried unusual worry. "Mom, I heard. Is it true Melissa and Ethan took out a loan under your name?" I went silent for a few seconds, then sighed. "It's true, son. And not only that, they mortgaged the Maple house, and the total debt is over $300,000. On the other end." I heard his breath quicken. Brian nearly shouted, "My God! How could you let this happen? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Tears stung my eyes. "I didn't want you to worry. I kept thinking it would be okay." But I was wrong. 2 days later, Brian caught a flight back to Boston. When he walked into my house, he hugged me tightly, his eyes red. His voice broke. "Mom, I promise I won't let you face this alone." My heart felt lighter, yet heavier at the same time. Lighter because at least one child still cared. Heavier because I knew the confrontation ahead would tear this family apart. That evening, we sat in Melissa's living room. The air was taut like a tightened string. Melissa crossed her arms, leaning back with a cold face. Ethan sat beside her, his eyes full of challenge. Brian stared at his sister, his voice sharp. "Do you even know what you've done? You turned Mom into a debtor. She could lose the house. How could you?" Melissa suddenly jumped up, slamming her hand on the table. "What do you know? Always acting so righteous. Mom spent her whole life worrying about you. You got a proper education, a stable job in Minnesota, all because she favored you." Brian froze, eyes blazing. "What did you just say?" "It was Mom who worked herself to the bone to pay for your studies in Boston. She hid from me every time she pulled money to help you. Who do you think was really prioritized here?" I cut in, my voice shaking. "Melissa, don't say that. I love you both the same. If there was favoritism, it was me giving you more than you ever realized." Melissa turned on me, her eyes burning like fire. "More than? Why was Brian always the one praised for being thoughtful? And me, I always had to fight for everything. I deserve more than this. Don't you understand?" I choked up, tears streaming down my face. Her words stripped away a brutal truth in her eyes. My love had never been enough. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke coldly. "You need to accept reality. The only way now is for you to help us pay the debt. We have no other choice." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "No. I was wrong to keep giving in. I gave everything. And now my daughter looks at me as an enemy. Melissa, what more do you want? Do you want me ruined completely?" The room sank into silence. Brian pulled me close, whispering, "Mom, enough. You're not their wallet anymore." His words echoed in my ears like a wake-up bell. I looked at Melissa, her eyes blazing with both anger and desperation. Then at Ethan, his face hard as stone. In that moment, I knew my family had fallen into the abyss of betrayal, and nothing could ever bring us back to what we once were. That night, I tossed and turned without sleep. The slow ticking of the clock felt like knives cutting through my thoughts. I cried. I hurt. I wrestled between a mother's love and the truth. But the more I thought, the clearer it became. If I kept silent and kept opening my wallet, I would lose everything, my dignity, my home, the rest of my life. And Melissa would never wake up. The next morning, I went to Harold's office. I laid the stack of papers on his desk. My voice strangely calm. Harold, I've made my decision. I will stop all financial support. And I want you to help me file a lawsuit against Melissa and Ethan for forging my signature. Harold looked at me for a long time, his eyes a mix of surprise and compassion. He nodded slowly. Diane, I know this is a painful decision, but you're doing the right thing for yourself. When I walked out of his office, for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders lighten, as though a massive weight had been lifted. But I also knew the real storm was still ahead. That evening, I went back to Melissa's house to confront them. The living room was brightly lit, but the air was heavy, like covered in mist. Melissa stepped forward, her eyes swollen, and the moment she saw me, she broke down, collapsing to her knees. Mom, please. Don't do this. I promise I'll change. I just need a little more time. Mom, don't sue me, I'll lose everything. Her sobs tore at my heart. I saw in her the little girl who once clutched my hand in a thunderstorm, trembling and afraid of losing her father. But at the same time, I saw the grown woman who had forged her mother's signature and coldly turned me into a debtor. I sat down, my voice steady but firm. Melissa, I gave you many chances, but you didn't value them. You didn't just make mistakes, you lied and betrayed me. I cannot keep covering this up. Ethan jumped from the sofa, his eyes blazing. You think you can beat us? If you dare to sue, I'll put everything in the papers. Let the world know you're a heartless mother who abandoned her own daughter. Brian stepped forward angrily, pointing straight at him. Shut up. You're the one who dragged my sister into this mess. You've used my mother enough. Ethan sneered, mocking, what do you know? You live in Minnesota? Your life is easy. You don't understand this pressure. I stood up, my voice stronger than it had ever been. I was no longer the trembling woman. I was a mother who had finally awakened after hitting the bottom. Enough. I am not your bank anymore. I am a human being. And I deserve respect. The words struck the silence of the room like a hammer. Melissa sobbed, her face twisted with tears. Ethan narrowed his eyes, stepping back slightly. Brian squeezed my hand tight, as if giving me strength. I continued, each word clear, I will not pay your debts, and I will let the law intervene. If you want to save yourselves, take responsibility. Don't look to me anymore. Melissa lifted her tear-streaked face. Mom, you really won't forgive me. My heart clenched. But I shook my head. Forgiveness? Maybe. But covering for you? No. I've been too soft. And that's exactly why you've become like this. No one spoke again. I turned and walked toward the door. Outside, the wind howled. But inside me, it felt as though a light had been lit. I knew storms lay ahead, but for the first time in years, I had stood up to protect myself. In the weeks that followed, everything moved faster than I could have imagined. Harold helped me complete the legal paperwork. The lawsuit was filed. The bank got involved, and the forged documents were submitted as evidence. After only a few short hearings, the verdict came down cold as a blade. Melissa and Ethan lost the case. Their upscale home was repossessed by the bank. The luxurious furnishings, the shiny SUV one by one. They were hauled away to be auctioned off. On the day the court declared them bankrupt, I sat in the back row with a heavy heart. Melissa buried her face in her hands, sobbing. Ethan tried to keep a composed air, but his eyes revealed pure hatred. As he walked past me, he muttered coldly, "You destroyed your own family." I was stunned, but I did not answer. I knew those words would haunt me for years. Then the news spread. In a small community like mine, No secret stays hidden long. People began whispering in the grocery store, at church, in the corner cafe. I would walk into the shop and hear snatches behind me. Poor Melissa and her husband taken to court by her own mother. They must have been desperate to do that. Still, it's so cold-blooded. Those murmurs were like hidden knives, stabbing me in the back every day. A long-time neighbor even dropped by and said gently, "Diane, you've been too harsh. When children make mistakes, you discipline them. Why take it to court? People will look at you." It's hard to accept. I forced a smile and replied, "If you were in my place, you would understand. Not everyone knows the whole truth." At night, when the little house fell quiet, I sat alone at the kitchen table beneath the yellow lamp, my lined face in its glow. I asked myself, am I truly too cruel? Do I deserve to be called a mother who abandoned her child? That question gnawed at me and robbed me of sleep. Brian saw my torment. He sat beside me, held my hand, and whispered, "You did the right thing. If you'd kept protecting them, they'd have sunk deeper. Don't let the gossip out there shake you." I nodded, but my eyes were wet. I understood that for a mother, nothing hurts more than having pushed her child into the hands of justice. I remembered Melissa as a child, dozing over her homework, and how I would lay a thin blanket over her. I remembered the morning she hugged me at the college gate and vowed she would make me proud. Those memories now felt like cuts to my heart, making every step I took unbearably heavy. The community kept talking. Some offered sympathy, others, judgment. An old friend called, half reproachful, half pitying, "Diane, why didn't you try to settle this within the family? Taking them to court, people will judge." I replied slowly, each word weighed. If there had been another way. "Do you think I wouldn't have taken it? I sacrificed my whole life. But at some point, I had to protect myself." Still, despite saying that, I felt utterly alone. Outsiders only saw the outcome, a mother taking her daughter to court, causing them to lose their home and their reputation. They didn't know the long nights I cried alone, or the times I bit my tongue and withdrew money to pull my child out of a bind. They didn't know I had been turned into an unwilling debtor by my own child. Some mornings, I opened the window and watched neighbors' curious eyes pass by on the brick street. No one spoke directly, but in those polite nods, I read quiet judgment. I closed the window, sat down, and felt the house that had once been a peaceful refuge become a solitary shell, imprisoning me. And so, I began to live in two worlds, one of torment and the dark shadow of rumor, the other, a fragile belief that I had done the right thing. I knew the path I chose was one no one could walk for me. But I also understood that if I retreated, I would lose myself forever. One early autumn morning, when yellow leaves had begun to carpet the walkway, I decided to step out of the house that had grown too small with all my heavy thoughts. I took the flyer Brian had given me the week before, information about a community club for retired women in Boston. At first I only meant to drop by, to get a little fresh air. The activity room sat in an old red brick building, its windows wide to let in the light. When I walked in, the smell of hot coffee and pastries filled the air, along with lively chatter. A small, silver-haired woman came up to me with a kind smile. "Hello, first time here." "Right, I'm Margaret." I nodded, a little embarrassed. Margaret showed me around and introduced me to the others. I sat down on a wooden chair, cradling a warm cup of tea, and listened to them talk about grandchildren, flower gardens, and trips. For the first time in a long while, I felt myself easing into a lightness I hadn't known. In the days that followed, I began to attend regularly. Mornings reading with the group, afternoons working in the shared garden, planting vegetables. I even signed up to help with a charity cooking program, preparing meals with other women for people experiencing homelessness. As I chopped vegetables and stirred steaming pots of soup, I realized my hands could still make warmth, but now I was doing it because I chose to. Not out of duty. Now I was doing it for myself. One afternoon, while I was shelving books in the club's small library, I heard someone call softly behind me, "Diane, are you Diane Walker?" I turned. Standing before me was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and bright eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. Even with time's changes, I recognized him immediately. George, an old college classmate who had pulled all-nighters with me studying philosophy, who had sat with me under the maple tree, planning our futures. I laughed without meaning to. "George, how many years has it been? I almost didn't recognize you." He smiled. That familiar, gentle smile. "I recognized you right away. Miss Walker from back then, still with those same steady eyes." We sat in a quiet corner and talked as if we had never been apart. George told me he had retired after many years, teaching at a university. He lived alone since his wife passed, spending his days reading and walking in the park. I listened, and I realized his voice gave me a strange feeling of safety, something I had lost long ago. In the days that followed, George often invited me along. Sometimes it was just a walk in the park. Sometimes it was joining a group of older friends to see an outdoor concert. He never pressed into personal matters, he simply listened when I wanted to share. One evening, after volunteering with the charity kitchen, we sat on the porch in the cool air. I sighed without thinking. "George, do you ever feel like you've given so much that when you finally look for yourself, there's nothing left?" He looked at me, his gaze gentle. "Diane, everyone reaches that point. But you know, the very moment you ask that question, you begin to reclaim what's rightfully yours. You are not just someone's mother or a shadow of the past. You are a person, and you still have the right to be happy." I was speechless. Those words fell like cool water on the parched soil of my heart. I realized that, perhaps for the first time in many years, I no longer felt like a burden or like I existed only to give. I deserved to live, to be loved, to have someone who would listen and value me. And from that day on, the path I walked was no longer only the dark route of loneliness and torment. In a life I had thought closed to me, another door had gently begun to open quietly, yet full of hope. But just as I began to find my footing again, a new knife plunged straight into my heart. One afternoon, Harold called me, his voice heavier than usual. "Diane, I need to see you right away. There's something important, and you must be prepared." I went to his office, uneasy. Harold sat behind his wooden desk, a thick stack of files before him. He took off his glasses, rubbed his temple, and looked me straight in the eye. I kept reviewing old documents, especially the life insurance policies Thomas bought, and I found something abnormal. I frowned. Insurance, I remember. My husband bought a life policy years ago. But after he died, I hardly touched it. Harold nodded and pushed the file toward me. "Yes, that policy. But the problem is, the current records show the beneficiary is not you, it's Melissa." My eyes widened and my heart stopped. "No, that can't be. My husband named me. How could it become like that?" Harold opened the page with the signature, his voice dropping. "Look closely. This is a beneficiary change form filed 3 years ago. The insured signature is yours. But Diane, I am certain that is not your real signature. It's forged." I held the paper, my hands trembling. The messy scrawl once again bore my name. I gasped, my whole body drained of strength. I whispered, "If I die, all the insurance money will go to Melissa." Harold nodded, his eyes full of pity. "Yes. It's not a small amount. About $150,000. I let the paper drop onto the desk. A fear I had never known gripped me. Before, I thought my daughter only took advantage and was greedy for money. But now, a horrific thought crept in. Does she wish I would disappear so she can get that money? I staggered to my feet, bewildered. Harold came and took my arm. His voice steady. Diane, you must be extremely careful. This is not just betrayal. This is a danger. I sank into a chair, my face in my hands. Tears fell. But they were no longer only sorrow, they were total collapse. In my head I heard Melissa's childhood voice, Mom, please, never leave me. Now. That same child had forged a signature to make me the deceased in a cold contract. That night I came home half-dazed. I locked the doors carefully, bolted extra locks, and sat staring out the window. Every outside sound the cars. The wind made me jump. I had never imagined I would fear my own daughter. Brian came to visit and Claire, seeing me dazed, asked Mom, "What's wrong?" I couldn't hold it and thrust the files at him. Brian read, his face draining of color. He grabbed my hand, his voice shaking with anger. Unbelievable. She's gone too far. Mom, you cannot be alone anymore. I'll stay with you. I shook my head, tears streaming. Brian, I don't want to believe it. But here it is in black and white. Where else can I turn? He held me tight, as if to shield me from the world. Let me take care of this. We will not let her destroy you again. That night, after Brian fell asleep in the next room, I wrote in my journal with a shaking hand, Motherhood, I once believed it was an unbreakable bond. But now, it has been twisted into a trap. I am no longer a mother in their eyes, only a key to a vault. I have lost the daughter I loved. The pen slid across the paper through my tears. But I knew from this moment I could never return to innocent trust. Part of me died with that insurance form. The rest of me had to wake up. A few weeks later, I did something I had never dared to imagine before. I sold the house on Maple Street, the place that held decades of memories with Thomas, where I watched my children grow up. The place I once believed was my final refuge. On moving day, I stood motionless in the living room, my hand on our wedding photo hanging on the wall. I whispered, as if to my husband Thomas, I'm sorry, but this house is no longer a safe place. It has become a seal of betrayal. I have to leave. I moved into a small apartment near the sea in Gloucester, not far from Boston. The balcony faced the ocean. In the early morning, opening the door brought the sound of waves and the salty tang of the air into my lungs. The apartment was simple, but I felt an unexpected lightness. No more walls heavy with memory. No more ghosts of deceit. Here, I began again. As an independent woman, no longer labeled solely as someone's mother or someone's support. Each morning, I walked along the sand, letting the sea breeze toss my silver hair. In the afternoons, I sat by the window and wrote in my journal. One day I wrote, I have not lost my children. I have lost the illusions I held about them. What I have reclaimed are my dignity and my freedom. When I finished, I smiled softly. For the first time in a long while. The smile came from inside, not to hide the pain. That Christmas, I no longer hurriedly hung a wreath hoping the children would drop by. Instead, I invited Brian, George, and a few neighbors I had come to know at the apartment. We set a long table in the living room with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie, and a bottle of red wine. As everyone gathered around and candlelight flickered over bright faces, my heart filled unexpectedly. George sat beside me and lightly took my hand, smiling. Diane, do you see? Family doesn't always have to be blood. Sometimes, it's made of people who truly cherish one another. Brian raised his glass, his voice low but firm. Mom, I'm proud of you. You had the courage to stand up, not just to protect yourself, but to teach me that true love doesn't mean letting others trample you. I looked around the table and met the eyes of my new friends, the women who read with me, the men who worked with me in the community garden. They weren't kin. but they made me feel seen, heard, and valued. That night, snow fell outside the window, and we sang old Christmas carols together. I closed my eyes and let the song mix with the distant sound of the waves, and an unfamiliar peace settled over me. I realized that love is not slavery and not blind sacrifice. For love to be healthy, it needs boundaries. Only by setting limits can we preserve our dignity and give love purely. I paid a high price to learn that, but in the end, I reclaimed freedom for my soul. In the warm glow of that new Christmas night, I whispered a blessing to myself, Diane. At last, you are home. You know, as I recount the final chapters of my life, I still wonder, does family love always require unconditional sacrifice? Or sometimes must that love be guarded by boundaries? If you were in my place facing betrayal from your own flesh and blood, what would you choose to endure in order to keep a so-called peace? Or to stand up and keep your dignity and freedom? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe your words will give strength to someone out there going through something similar. And if this story touched your heart, please follow my channel, Shattered Trust. Here, you'll hear more stories, true journeys of family, faith, and betrayal, and, above all, journeys of people reclaiming their dignity. Sometimes it's those stories that make us realize real strength begins the moment we say, enough. Finally, I want to say a sincere thank you to you for patiently listening to this long story. Your presence and attention have made my words less lonely. I hope that in these lines, you find empathy and know you never have to face your losses alone.